Hello, everyone. It's Francis Widdowson here. Glad to be here. Glad to see everyone. I wanted to do a video today on what's going to be happening at the University of British Columbia, which I am very familiar with that campus because I was a student at the University of British Columbia in 1987. So I spent quite a lot of time at the University of British Columbia. And I see this as a potentially a breakthrough moment at UBC. Tom Flanagan, who was speaking on Rebel News with Drea Humphrey a few days ago, said that I am the sharp end of the spear. And this is true. I am going into these universities. That's the only way to do it. You've got to go in, you've got to press them on what they're doing, because if you just go through the regular channels, they will shut you down anymore. If we want to save our universities, we have to go in there and face them head on in terms of what they're doing. And so on January 22nd, Thursday, which is a Thursday, 11 o'clock Pacific, I'm going to be going in there just saying, here's the event booking form. Why don't you, do this properly? Well, I'm allowed to go onto campuses and have discussions with students. I'm not making any demands from the university. I don't have a microphone. I don't have a campus be reserved for me. I don't have any infrastructure or anything like that, as we saw with that group at the University of Victoria on December 2nd, where they had, a lot of organization that had been done. I'm going to start off at the Indian Residential School History and Research Center. And this is so people can find me and ask me some questions, or I can ask them some questions. It's not because I want to cordon off this space for myself or anything like that. And, I should be allowed to go onto a campus and just have some discussions. And if other people want to come and have discussions with me, well, they're allowed to do that as well. So that's the first thing. So it's not an event. I can go have coffee with people at the university. I can go just on campus and have some discussions. And so the other thing too is that on this poster, it says, with Francis Widdowson and people wanting to pursue the truth, Kamloops 215 claim. So that's on the kind of notice of that I'm going to be there. No big deal. And so, well, my audio and video are choppy. Oh, I guess my internet connection. I don't know why, because it seems to be acting normally. Unfortunately, pixelating. Well, we'll see how it goes. Hopefully, it will, right itself. Everything that I'm talking about today, and it's on a wokeacademy.info site. I'll just put it in the chat here. There's a post which is called UBC and the Tip of the Spear, and it has all these documents that I'm going to be talking about. The other thing I wanted to address, which Sean Carlton has been making some hay out of course. I won't use the nickname that I used to have for him because I don't do that anymore. Anyway, he said he noticed that I changed the poster from Francis Widdowson, Dallas Brody, and Jim McMurtry to just the more generic people who would like to come and pursue the truth on the Kamloops claim. Now, the reason why I did that is not because I want to be in any way not be associated with Dallas Brody or Jim McMurtry. It's just because 1BC, I don't know what's happening with them at all. Any of the people that I saw, or anyone, I'm not trying. In fact, I'm going to send out invitations to all the politicians, so if Dave Eby or, John Rustad or whomever wants to come and pursue the truth about the Kamloops claim, I'm happy to discuss it with them. So because of the kind of factions and conflict that exists within the 1BC party, I didn't want to make it seem as if I was taking a side in whatever dispute that is. To be honest with you, I don't have enough information on the various personality conflicts that existed. So I don't really want to get involved in that. And to be honest with you, that's not really my issue. My issue is the Kamloops case, pursuing the truth about the Kamloops case, and I want to pursue the truth with anyone. I don't have a particular, faction that I want to align myself with. So if I think that Dallas Brody and Jim McMurtry are going to be coming. I don't know for sure. It's not, I'm just coming. I'm coming to just have a discussion if with anyone who wants to. I'm not expecting to have space booked off for me or any kind of thing like that. I'm just going to be there interacting with people, which should be normal on a university campus. So that's the deal behind that. Anyway, so that's the event. In terms of British Columbia, University of British Columbia, this is a very serious institution. So University of British Columbia is known as one of the most prestigious, highly respected universities in Canada. So UVic, like I went to UVic for 5 years. I really love that institution. It was I had a great experience, but I know it's not rated as highly as University of British Columbia, especially in research. And that's why I think UBC, it's really important to have this happen at the University of British Columbia. And for people who are close by, we really need you to come to the University of British Columbia on January 22nd to have this discussion. As you saw from the University of Victoria, we're dealing with serious activists. So what they were able to do is in the short space of time of, I think, 2 or 3 days, they were able to amass hundreds of people to come and spout their nonsense and totalitarianism. That's what they were doing. It was unbelievable. You had this poet laureate who was talking directly about the 215 in Kamloops. So she believes that there's the remains of 215 children that have been found. We had 7 members of staff or faculty that were there. Rai Moran, who is the head librarian of Truth and Reconciliation, and Carrie Newman, who is in fine arts, who was the person who designed the 215 plus posters. And you had a number of other professors that were involved in mobilizing all these different elements. And of course, the activists, his last name is Sweedle, Steve Sweedle. He was the person wearing the Cowichan sweater. Anyway, he's got some Aboriginal organization where he's saying he's going to follow me around wherever I go on university campuses to try to shut me down. That's what that's they're not into dialogue or discussion or pursuit of truth. They want to stop this claim from being challenged, and it's got obviously a huge significance. And because and my own view is it's the weakest house of cards. It's the house of cards that it's the card in the house of cards that if you start to pull on that, the whole the house of cards becomes shaky, because this is an Aboriginal industry constructed framework that has been happening since the 1970s. And Aboriginal title and all these things. These are all inventions of the Aboriginal industry to extract transfers. And it's part of the whole demoralization and destabilization, which happens when you're beginning to see a totalitarian takeover of a system. And that's what we're facing here. So let's get serious about this. It's very, very serious. And I need people. I seriously need people to come there and to show people that universities are areas where you should be able to follow the evidence wherever it leads. You should have open discussion, critical thinking, etc. But you've got to base your arguments on evidence. And this is not happening at universities. And we can see it at University of British Columbia, which in my view is quite shocking, because, places like Thompson Rivers University or all these, they're glorified community colleges. They're not high profile research institutions that you see at McGill, University of Toronto, and University of British Columbia, University of Alberta, maybe Dalhousie. I don't know, but I know that UBC is the top 5 institutions. Which brings me to this institution and why it is so incredibly important to challenge the University of British Columbia. So we have the claim on May 27, 2021, which was that the remains of 215 children had been confirmed, and that some of these children were as young as 3 years old. That was the announcement that was made on May 27th by the Kamloops Indian Band. What we see now is a rewriting of history. And people are saying that the Kamloops Indian Band just said potential unmarked graves, and the media lost its head and started making up all these things. This is just not true. The Kamloops Band manufactured this. I don't know how many members of that band still believe that there are graves there, but certainly the lawyers and the consultants and the publicists acting behind the scenes knew what they were doing, and they constructed this so that people would think that this was the case. And the fact that it was successful was shown by all the politicians saying almost right away that this terrible tragedy had happened, etc. Genocide was put forward by Jagmeet Singh. The government put the flags at half-mast, but it wasn't just one party. If you look at Aaron O'Toole talking in early June, he was just as bad as the rest of them. So it's not a party thing. It's a system of demoralization and where you're destabilizing. This is what the nature of these politicians are doing. They wanted people to believe that Canada was a genocidal country, because if you think your whole thing is about genocide, well, why bother to defend it in any way? You might as well just get rid of it. And that's part of this kind of process that's going on. Anyway, University of British Columbia. Anyway, so this whole university, they are one of the main perpetrators of this grave error that's happened at Kamloops. And UVic, you saw this a lot too. University of British Columbia is just as bad, and maybe even worse, because it's got these institutions. It's got these various significant kinds of elements in it. And I'm just going to name 3 of the most significant that I'm aware of. Number 1, the First Nations House of Learning. That is an absolutely destructive force at the University of British Columbia. I'll talk about that shortly. Number 2, the Residential School History and Dialogue Center. That's where I just am telling people I'm going to be to have this discussion. I don't have to have that space. I'm happy to go somewhere else, which is less, taking over things or anything. But that's just as good as any. And then the third is the areas of archaeology and anthropology, especially anthropology, but archaeology is implicated as well. And I've got a little bit of a graphic here showing these 3 elements of things that I've been looking at. In terms of the University of British Columbia First Nations House of Learning, I've already done a video on this entity. Most significantly, that entity is led, if we can call it that, by a person by the name of Jolie Viveros. And Jolie, if you're listening to this, I would really love to have a discussion with you about the false claims that you've been making about ground penetrating radar. Because I have been interacting with geoscientists on this matter, and I know that ground penetrating radar is not able to determine if anomalies are remains. And Jolie has been saying this over and over again, quite aggressively. And perhaps we shouldn't blame her, because that's when it comes to the archaeology and anthropological areas of UBC. That's been providing false information. But Jolie is very aggressive about this. Anyway, I did a video, which I've linked at the wokeacademy.info site, about that First Nations House of Learning. That's the first area. Number 2 is the Indian Residential School History and Dialogue Center. This is supposed to be a repository of residential school records, similar, I guess, to the Truth and Reconciliation, the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation in University of Manitoba, and it's got some of the same problems, and it's probably worse. It's probably much worse than that entity, because it's just basically an advocacy area for a particular view of the residential schools and trying to shape research to suit that particular view. And the center is run by a law professor by the name of Johnny Mack. And I've just been doing some research on this entity. And Johnny Mack wrote a piece very, very recently. I think it was on December 3rd. He was responding to what happened at the University of Victoria. So that crazy thing that happened at the University of Victoria, where all these activists showed up, fomented by the professors, a bunch of students who are complete ideologues, and you can't have a discussion with them because they know this is true and they're not going to listen to any contrary evidence. And then the best example of that was when I believe her name was Angela. She got up just to say, hey, I'm a young person who's 23, who's 21, why are you at university? And then she brought up, universities are supposed to be marketplaces of ideas. And that, of course, was a bridge too far. It's a bridge too far. Surrounded by, I think it's about 4 people, one of them being a professor of, decolonizing dancing or whatever it is. The one I had the picture of on Twitter. She was one of the people who came up, surrounded this woman and basically dragged her off. Anyway, that just, you don't need to watch anything else besides that. It's like, no, we don't discuss ideas here. We know the truth, and anyone who doesn't accept our view is going to be pulled away and not be allowed to speak. That's what they do. And so how could anyone watching that say this is a really good thing to be happening at this university. I don't understand how any normal, critically thinking, rational person could say, yeah, this is a really good direction for this university to be headed in. Anyway, in response to this situation, this he's called an academic director. I cannot believe that's his title. It should be, director of propaganda. Like that's what he is. He writes this piece, which I have on the wokeacademy.info site, Turning Sideways Toward Truth, a statement from the Indian Residential School History and Dialogue Center. Anyway, he says in this piece that he wrote, the history of the Indian residential school system does not require debate. It is established through the voices of survivors, through government and church records, through the extensive findings of the national commissions and inquiries, and through the ongoing work of Indigenous communities who have carried these truths across generations. So that is insane to have an academic director saying that there's no debate that's required. That's how we are able to move towards the truth, is by considering contrary viewpoints. They could be wrong, completely wrong. They might have some truth to them. They could be completely true. And that's not doing that center at all. So that's kind of a shocking document as well. When I saw that academic director saying, we don't have debate here in this what's called a dialogue center. So this is not a dialogue center. It is a monologue center. In order to have dialogue, you have to have, two things. Monologue, that's it. That's the only view that can be entertained. So everyone's probably already aware of those two entities. So that's a shocking thing too. And number 3, archaeological and anthropological research at the University of British Columbia. And this is where a lot of the rot is very deep. And it concerns largely the anthropology department, but the person that I'm referring to first is an archaeologist. Supposedly his name is Andrew Martindale. And he's been involved in the Cooper Island case. And I just have one tweet where I took a clip from what he was saying with respect to the Cooper Island case. And there's a lot of problems with Martindale and the Cooper Island case. One of the most significant was that he appears to have made up some claims, because he says that an elder by the name of Monty Charlie said a child was buried next to a stump of a tree, but that elder had said he didn't know why that child had died. A few years later, Cooper Island broadcast that was done by Duncan McHugh, Martindale now says is that child was pushed out of a window by a nun. So the question is, how did Martindale come from, because Charlie had died. So it wasn't because Charlie had changed his mind. It was because Martindale had changed the story. Anyway, he makes this ridiculous kind of clip that I put on Twitter saying, we have identified 342 unmarked graves. So that's the first claim. The second sentence, 111 of these are possible graves, 133 probable, and 98 are likely. So does Andrew Martindale not understand the difference between the existence of an unmarked grave and a grave that's possible, probable, or likely? And how do you distinguish between a possible grave, a probable grave, and likely grave? It's just absurd. Anyway, the media, of course, listens to this and doesn't seem to notice any kind of weirdness about that. Anyway, I find this is amazing. Anyway, and then I come to my final thing that I posted, which is a person by the name of Brian Whiting. And my geoscience contact sent me this paper, this peer-reviewed paper. And in this peer-reviewed paper, it's called Community-Led Investigations of Unmarked Graves at Indian Residential Schools in Western Canada. Overview, status report, and best practices. And I've provided a link. It's open access, so you can go into it. In this article, Brian Whiting, he's part of some geoscan, some subsurface surveys. So, you know, he's going to do whatever is going to get him money from GPR scans. But the problematic thing is it also references Department of Anthropology, University of British Columbia, Vancouver. So this has got UBC's name on it, this piece, this article. Acknowledgements where he is very appreciative of his colleague Andrew Martindale, also references the fellow members of the BC Technical Working Group on Unmarked Graves, right? So there's another archaeological entity that is associated with the universities. And then on page 13 of this article, you see the wonderful flow chart that Brian Whiting has provided us. And it shows all the things that you're doing, like your counseling and providing supports, and you've got all the records being looked at, and you know, traditional use survey, all these things. And then you run your you find out where these knowledge keepers see that there's bodies buried. You take your, you perform the geophysical survey, and then you have this it's a rectangle. Excavate, yes or no is the question mark. And so if you do, if it's yes, you excavate and perform DNA analysis. Now, of course, you're only going to perform DNA analysis if there are actual remains there. So perhaps that was an oversight analysis. But that's not the shocking thing. The shocking thing is if you are not going to excavate. What do you do if you're not going to excavate? And guess what? You quote and memorialize graves, unquote. This is in a peer-reviewed journal. That's amazing. So that's what we should be doing in Kamloops. If we're going to take that seriously, that's what we should be doing in Kamloops, because they've done the GPR survey. It looks like they're not going to excavate, in spite of the fact that they got millions of dollars. The reports that they were supposed to have been doing to tell us what they're up to with the excavation has been planning to do and so on. But hey, don't worry about that. Like all that excavation, that's not necessary, because what you do is you mark and memorialize the graves. And the Kamloops band, you might have seen a thing called I think it's called the Mass Grave Hoax. They saw that there's the markers, like, so Sarah Bollier or whomever went and marked all these stakes where each of those graves is supposed to be. Hey, so you've marked the graves, pay for a bunch of, spend that $12 million or what's left of it, which is my understanding, not very much is left of it. Do a bunch of headstones for unknown children. Has stated that their child never came home, so we don't know who you would even put on the headstone. And memorialize the whole thing. And the other aspect is that, and this is something I was talking about on Twitter, which is that Jerry Peters, who's the head of a RCMP investigation that was done in the 1990s, they were investigating abuse, some persons taken to task. It was only, sexual abuse that they were investigating. That's not true. It was started off with, because they were worried about Arthur Plant, but it became, the investigation was criminal acts. Any allegations of criminal acts would be investigated. And there were no allegations of criminal acts in terms of unmarked graves and so on with respect to the Kamloops Indian Residential School. So nothing came forward in the Bellow, who was the woman who accosted me at Thompson Rivers University. She was there as the liaison, making sure everyone felt comfortable in telling their story and so on. So it wasn't as if it was just a top-down process. It was involving the communities and so on, and allegations about Indian residential school. So UBC, what you are doing is seriously academically compromised. Your research is deeply flawed due to ideological capture by Aboriginal. And we've seen it Simon Fraser as well. And certain things, and that's largely they get to control the kind of research that comes out. And of course, they don't want any research which is going to negatively impact the transfers that they are able to extract. And so that's why we're getting this really, really corrupted research. This corrupted research has highly ideological centers like the First Nations House of Learning and the Indian Residential School History and Dialogue. What's called the monologue, should be the monologue center. It's a monologue, not a dialogue. Anyway, this needs to be challenged, and it must be challenged now. We must have true. We cannot allow the universities to propagandize and indoctrinate in the way that they are doing. And this is especially galling with respect to the University of British Columbia because, well, no one probably listens to what Thompson Rivers University says because it's a glorified community college. This is not the case for the University of British Columbia. One of the, the academic jewels in the Canadian, jewels, the crown of Canadian universities. Okay, so once again, January 2nd, 11 o'clock a.m. Gonna just go and have a little bit of discussion. Anyone who wants to discuss this, it's just like having a conversation with a bunch of different people. I don't have to get. It's not a. Knock it off with this nonsense. All that does is it just allows UBC to control the conversations that it goes on its campus. And of course, it's not going to want to hear that it's been misleading faculty, staff, and students for the last 4.5 years with its nonsense and its ridiculous entities like the First Nations House of Learning and the Indian Residential School History and Dialogue Center. So we cannot allow the university to control this if we're going to right the ship. We have to go in there and have discussions. No big deal. And for Steve Sweetle or whatever, whoever these activists are going to be, I'm happy to talk to you. I'm totally accountable. I'm happy to explain why I think it's highly improbable there residential school. So if people are close to Vancouver, we need you. This is it. This is the super nanny's last stand. Because that's my method. I just keep on bringing them back on the naughty spot. Keep on carrying through with the discussions. If they're going to get upset and start banging on the drums and everything, they're entitled to bang the drums. Like, you can do that. You can whatever. You can call me any name in the book. I don't care. It doesn't bother me at all because I know that's your strategy. is to deflect away from the actual evidence-based arguments. So that's my plan. Move the needle a little bit more in getting people to realize that this is very serious. And if we can't have the truth about Kamloops, we can't have the truth about anything. And universities are over. And universities are incredibly important institutions because they are the one it's where professionals are trained. So if you're wondering why all these crazy things are going on in the school boards and the hospital boards, etc., it's because all these people have been trained in the universities. And then finally, it is the bulwark against authoritarianism. And because of tenure and the protection of the unpopular views, and now you have the Nazi Party, having its propaganda arm, not an actual university. And universities in Germany in the 30s were 20s and 30s were the most advanced universities in the world, and they were just gutted by the Nazis. And we are facing January 22nd, 11 o'clock in the morning. Okay. What do people think about all this? I hope that was, you heard what I was saying. Yeah, but he got to talk. I saw a presentation with Mark Hecht. He and Mark Hecht gave presentations. So that was before the complete meltdown. Just looking to see if there's any. Why don't you put questions in the because I can't see them all here. Yeah. Someone's saying UBC is a Nazi Party Canada. It's not true. There's conflicts that exist in terms of ethnic nationalism. And of course I'm not a proponent of any of these kinds of nationalistic kinds of things, but it's something we have to work through and something we have to discuss, right? It's difficult because a lot of the ideas I find to be very disturbing. But you don't get rid of bad ideas through censorship. If you think some kind of quote unquote Nazi idea is being, and usually when people say Nazi, they don't even know what they're talking about. Like it's not like people call me a Nazi. It's like, how am I a Nazi? This is ridiculous. You have to substantiate. That's defamation, by the way, if you're going to do that. And you better have some evidence of what you're talking about if you're going to start accusing people of being a Nazi. But still, like, we have to discuss these things. If we can't discuss these things, and it's, universities they're not operating properly. That's where we discuss things. And the truth matters for Aboriginal people even more than it does for non-Aboriginal people, because they are in marginalized Aboriginal people have terrible suffering that's going on, and your suffering is not going to be alleviated by all this grievance mongering by the Aboriginal industry and the siphoning off of money for legal disputes that just line the pockets of the neo-tribal elites and all their lawyer and consultant brokers. So if you really care about Aboriginal people and you're worried about the most marginalized, the ones that are suffering the most, running Andrew Martindale's GPR equipment over some field and pretending there's unmarked graves there is not going to that's not going to address any of that. We need to seriously address Aboriginal problems, the most significant being the fetal alcohol syndrome problem. And no one is even studying that because this is seen as being stigmatizing. But in order to address problems, you have to understand them, and we don't understand that problem at all. And it's certainly not getting any better. because you have a number of people who are trapped in those communities. And that's what if I were trapped in one of those communities with no escape, you start engaging in substance abuse because that's how you escape. And so it's not any judgment about people who have to resort to that. It's a way of figuring out how to deal with this massive problem. Anyway, I don't speak for Aboriginal people, or is there people saying I am? I don't know. I'm just saying the truth is important for everyone, and especially those who are marginalized. And this is not the truth. Like all this nonsense about we're pursuing the truth, like this is what they were saying at UVic. You don't pursue the truth by stopping oppositional viewpoints from being expressed. That is a surefire way to have falsehoods being perpetuated. And that's what's happened with the Kamloops case, is that you're just propagandizing and indoctrinating. No, it's been studied, but there were, for FAS, those reports were not allowed to be released. So there might have been some research done, but it's not the kind of research which is objective research, where you need to have scientific research, not research that's controlled by communities. Anyway, and we should, like I'm not a nationalist myself. I don't have any skin in that game. I think the arguments one can look at and analyze, but I think the truth, that's my concern, is the truth. As an academic, the truth. And if nationalism is the perspective that is backed up with evidence, well, you have to follow that. So, but these are very complex political arguments. But the Kamloops case, it's a simple one. Are there remains there? Have the remains been confirmed or not? And the answer is no. The remains have not been confirmed. And it's highly improbable that there will be remains there. And some people are saying that there's a cemetery in the old apple orchard. There's no evidence for a cemetery. Scott Hamilton, in his report, I posted that on Twitter, he hasn't been able to find any evidence of a cemetery. And they have a cemetery across from St. Joseph's Church on the Kamloops Reserve. And so, why would you have another cemetery? You've already got one. And Catholics are very concerned about cemeteries. They don't just bury people willy-nilly unless it's a clandestine issue where they would want to hide it. Anyway. So, are people still claiming on here that there's evidence of remains of 215 children? Is anyone on this list saying that? What is the evidence? Anyway, I find it hard to believe that people are still making this argument, but they are. So, not today, you're arguing that the remains of 215 children have been found or been confirmed? What is your evidence? See? Piss off. Anyway. Other comments. The truth. That's all I care about, is the truth. All the political arguments, we all have our political positions. We can witness. What is the archival documentation? So witness testimony, the Satanic Panic was based on witness testimony. That's how reliable that is. What is the archival documentation for 215, the remains of 215 children? We have 49, and then we got additional stuff from and the National Center. So it's now 82, I believe. We're working away getting death certificates and so on for that. So that doesn't, the archival documentation does not support the idea there's clandestine burials in Kamloops. Anyway, but that's like everything else is just noise. We must have the truth about Kamloops. We must, and we're going to get it, or we're not going to get it. Sorry. You never get the truth. You try to move closer to the truth with reason, evidence, and logic. Anyway, we're going to use reason, evidence, and logic on January 22nd. Anyone can go to the UBC campus and use reason, evidence, and logic. It's not something that UBC administrators can control. And if UBC administrators want to control this, I will take it to you so hard that you'll wish you never did that. So why don't you put out some messaging about how it's important to have the truth about Kamloops? That's what you're supposed to be doing. And, tell those crazy people who just want to shut down discussion that that's not acting in an appropriate manner. Of course, we didn't see that with, what's her face? Rabina Thomas, who is an unbelievably embarrassing president of University of Victoria. And I've looked at her dissertation. Yeah, it's like, this is not, her dissertation is about honoring people. So she writes her dissertation to honor people. That's not what a dissertation is about. It's not about honoring. First of all, you might not honor them if you get the facts all together. So this is just propaganda. Anyway, UVic is an embarrassment. I've got a master's degree from there. I'm not shocked because I've seen all the nonsense for the last several years, but it really is kind of sad that I thought it was wonderful. I really did. I really, really liked it. UBC, I found it cold and difficult, and it was not very welcoming environment. But I was young and I lacked confidence, so I wasn't able to survive in the hurly-burly of 300 people in a class kind of thing, and so it just was difficult. But still, I realize that it's at a higher level of prestige. Okay. Anyway, I'm seriously looking forward to this January 22nd date. And I'm just trying to make the point. We need to be able to have open discussion at universities. I could completely be wrong. I could stand corrected, but as that troll was saying, it's witness testimony and archival records. There's only 2 eyewitnesses for what happened at Kamloops: Billy Coombs and Jesse Jules. Jesse Jules was, we've never seen him. We've never heard him directly. It's all through the lens of Kevin Annett. So Kevin Annett could have just made up everything which Kevin Annett has a tendency to do. Billy Coombs, we do see a clip from in Unrepentant of him saying that children were buried at Kamloops. But Billy Coombs is the same guy who said that Queen Elizabeth II abducted 10 children from the Kamloops Indian Residential School. The Queen was in 1964. The Queen wasn't in there in 1964. And even if she were, how could the Queen abduct those 10 children without people noticing? And who were the children? We don't have any names of children who were abducted by Queen Elizabeth. This is just Billy Coombs's feverish brain. It's not that, satanic panic. Satanic panic, all sorts of People believe that. They really did believe. They weren't lying. It wasn't a hoax. They believed that all these horrible satanic rituals, that they'd witnessed these things. Anyway, okay. So I should probably end it here, unless there's some pressing matter. Anyway, I'm looking forward to seeing people on the 22nd. This is the time. The time is now. And it's unbelievably urgent. I don't know how to stress this enough. Is that if we lose the University of British Columbia, it's over. We need to right the ship. We need to give it our best shot. This is the best shot that we have. And the more people that we have there, the more we'll be able to, sort of show UBC that, listening to the activists is not going to get you anywhere. The idea is to demobilize the activists and restore some kind of academic character to a university which used to be one of the best universities in Canada. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you on January 22nd.